Hey, pleasure to be here. It's actually my first time in the Middle East, and I haven't been here for even 24 hours, so this is quite exciting for me as well. Every panel starts with an introduction, but I'm going to let my panelists do that first, and then I'll introduce myself a little bit more. We'll go from left to right. Areije.
Hi, I'm Areije, and I'm from the Bahrain Development Bank. I run the Development Services Division, and most recently, I lead the fund management for the Al-Waha Fund of Funds.
Great. Very concise. Thank you.
Hello, guys. I'm Idriss, Rifai, founder CEO of Fetchr. We do e-commerce logistics all across the GCC.
It was even more concise.
Hi, I'm Badr, CEO of Lamsa, the leading brand and platform for children's edutainment in Arabic and MENA.
I'm Aziz Hayat, associate at Faith Capital Holding in Kuwait, an early stage VC focusing on seed and Series A companies.
Great. And as mentioned, my name is Wauters. I'm a technology journalist based and specialized in Europe. So this is uncharted territory for me as well. They think they're doing me a favor by inviting me to moderate this discussion, but actually, I'm here to learn. So they're my teachers. And we're going to talk about how to build disruptive startups, which is a term I don't particularly like a lot. So rather I have a discussion about how do you scale startups in this region, how is it different or similar from other startup ecosystems, and yeah, what can we improve in the region? So I guess that's the main question. The reason I'm interested in this is because I've been researching startup ecosystems for quite a while now, about 15 years. And I see these things coming back all the time. You have in my view, the internal process of building a startup is, you need to find a business model, you need to develop a product or a service, you need to find product market fit, you need an addressable market, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have all the other elements which are sort of outside of all that have a direct effect on your ability to scale, but you don't necessarily have any control over. And that's what I call an ecosystem, which is made up of the talent that's available, the capital that's available, the infrastructure, sometimes the raw infrastructure, the roads and the airports and the Wi-Fi connections. And then you have sort of everything else, the culture, the mindset, the corporates, the other startups. Do they engage with one another to learn from each other, to lift each other up? All of that is what I call ecosystem. So these two things are what we're going to talk about. And I would love, this is a really basic question, but essentially, if I look at the startup ecosystems, I should say, because one thing that I've learned is it's quite fragmented in the region. We'll dive into that. But what can you tell me about the startup ecosystems in this region that I don't know as a novice?
Now we start from right to left.
Now we start from right to left. Aziz, you go first.
Right to left. First thing I'd say is just because most of the cities in the region are within driving distance of each other doesn't mean they have the exact same ecosystem. If you come here with an outsider's perspective and start looking for like a Silicon Valley type origin story, you will be sorely disappointed. Our startup system doesn't cluster around universities. It doesn't cluster around well-known angels with so-and-so exits in the region. We still depend on the traditional sources of financing, which is the family funds and certain individuals within certain families who you'd say are more responsible for that kind of deployment and that risk and that appetite for risk. The other thing is, depending on where you're talking about exactly, so in the UAE, it's all about importing talent to a quote-unquote sexy location where people would love to come spend a few years and spend their time at a startup. In Kuwait, it would be a bit more homegrown. You see a lot more Kuwaitis in the region, but there's still quite a bit of imported talent, especially in the fields that are very, very difficult to fill with local talent because we don't exactly have anywhere to poach from. I think the huge pain points would be marketing and technology. The in-house offshore type GCC startup model is becoming more and more prevalent. Frankly, I think if it wasn't more and more prevalent, we wouldn't be seeing the amount of startups that we're seeing nowadays. Mainly because the talent issue would be a prohibitive factor. In terms of the financial aspect, I'm going to boil this down very basically into talent and money, even though I can go on for an hour easily. So on the money side of things, the cash exists, it's there. The issue is the sophistication required for certain people to deploy it in certain situations. Folks like Faith Capital, we're working on that. We're kind of educating the ecosystem, and thankfully now that there are more successful startups out there and some more exits, although the exits are still kind of heavy in terms of the F&B delivery space, those former founders and initial employees are going on to become better founders second time around and better funders first time around.
Well, let's get the founder perspective, because we have two startup entrepreneurs here, Idriss and Badr. Maybe your perspective on the ecosystems, I always say, from your point of view.
I mean, I think the ecosystem changed dramatically in the past few years. So when I started the company 6 years ago, that was a completely different story. I mean, especially, so if you look at funding, getting like seed money, like $1 million or close to that, was very difficult back then. Now I feel like it's much easier. You have like accelerator incubators. You have quite a lot more. It's more, I mean, far from being perfect, but I think the angel ecosystem is getting, you know, like structured. I found it much easier to do it than what it was like 6 years ago. I mean, right now I think that the value of debt for startup is really like large Series A, all the way to like Series B, C. So if you want to raise anywhere between $10 million to $50 million, $70 million, it becomes very difficult. Why? It's because your business is still intrinsically risky, right? Because you're a startup and you're disrupting it. Your revenues are going up, but you fail to actually find the right type of, that's what I found, to find the right type of investors. One of the things that I didn't expect is that I expected like Series C and beyond to be easier. I found this incredibly hard still. So I don't know, like it feels like for me personally, it feels like the ecosystem is getting like ready as I move past it. So I hate it, obviously.
You're ahead of the curve.
Yeah, so like I found it still extremely difficult to raise like $100 million plus in this part of the world. You know, despite the fact that you have most of the LPs that are actually based here, but they tend not to invest or diversify their investments out of the region, even though they got fast-growing startups. So I've got literally discussions with like LPs that would like to invest through their US-based fund into Fetchr. So I found it a bit weird.
We're falling back on the topic of investments quite a lot, but I also want to know from the other things that I mentioned, culture, mindset, is there enough talent here? Is there infrastructure? Is everything here in place to sort of go to the next level?
Yeah, I think I share that note with Idriss that it's getting easier. So when we started in 2013. A lot of the things that exist today did not exist then. So we had to manually do a lot of the things or kind of lobby or talk to people about just, you know, the idea of, just a small example, we create content for kids. So at that time, any investor that we would talk to and say, we want to build our own content, they're like, no, content doesn't work. And good thing that we didn't listen to them. Like even some of our existing shareholders, we laugh about it now. We kind of say, remember, you know, in 2013, you told us not to build content and we didn't listen to you. And now we're saying, don't do anything except produce more content. And it's because it worked. So, you know, when Netflix and others came and kind of proved that these models work, people kind of bought into the vision that we had. I think the other point was, whenever we talk about infrastructure stuff, so I mean, Fetchr is a really good example. Like I was talking to Idriss this morning, a big portion of their business depends on cash on delivery. And you wouldn't expect a service like a subscription service like Lamsa to have cash on delivery for a subscription online service, but we have to do that, and we sometimes work together to deliver subscription via cash, which really doesn't make sense if I say to someone coming from Europe or somewhere else. It's like counterintuitive, but you just have to look at what the customers are doing. I think the third point that I want to mention is when it comes, and I think Idriss mentioned this, when we started in 2013 and we got VC money, a lot of the VCs around us were saying, guys, just focus on growing the business. So we grew the business, we continue to grow the business. And then at some point you're like, okay, we're growing fast, super fast, and you look at raising bigger capital. And you see a lot of the attention in the region is focused around seed, Series A, but what happens to the bigger guys that kind of grew based on the seed funding or Series A or B, and then it just becomes, I think, a bit more difficult to continue to grow at the scale that you want to grow with capital from this region. But it's also interesting to see that the LP angle. So LPs here, and it's just a question, like I don't know if you guys maybe Areije can shed some light on that. She works with a lot of people in the investment space. The LPs here want to invest outside. And then we see a lot of friends from international VCs coming here to raise from LPs here to invest outside. So it's just, and it's quite challenging. We just don't understand sometimes where the money is going or what's the perspective. And we just hear that there's lots of cash here, but where is it going to which industries? It's quite tricky the way that we look at it.
Well,
Areije, that's addressing you. So.
Yeah, no, I know. It's always addressing me right now. I think, unfortunately, or fortunately for both you and Idriss, you guys have to pave the way for the rest of everybody. And I think, ultimately, I started with the bank 9 years ago. Before that, I was in more mainstream banking. So for me, entering this world and seeing it grow. So before even becoming an entrepreneur was like a complete taboo. Now you see a lot of parents are so proud. My son started his own business. So that sort of happened. And I think even when it comes to the whole investment perspective, when we first started our investor sort of support workshops about 2-3 years ago, we had people saying, okay, but then how can I guarantee the returns to? And we're like, no, this is not the same thing, And okay, how can I let them project the financials for the next year and how much do I expect to? No, this is not the same thing. But then you have the same group of people and different ones that have actually turned their family offices into venture capital firms that are now looking to do that. They're all fighting over term sheets. And yeah, you guys are unlucky because now you guys are growing. So now we need to educate the people who've been very much more attuned to private equity and the more traditional to actually move into Series C and D. And I think the platform that we've created out of Bahrain, which is the fund of funds, is to help build that kind of venture capital capability. And as much as we can, I think the conversations we have, being able to engage with venture capitalists, and it's not only us, I mean, even our peers in Saudi Arabia, even in the UAE, they're all doing that. Albeit we may be the first to have deployed into the region. Our peers are also doing that now. But again, it takes one person to do it, and then the whole. I hate this word, but FOMO. So everybody wants to, the fear of missing out on the big successes. So, you guys have succeeded. Your big news is coming around in the region about a lot of your peers that has started just at the same time as you guys did. And so that moment when these returns are flooding in and that capital is coming in, people will start to say. And unfortunately, and I'm allowed to say this because I'm from the region, sometimes we have this mindset that, the people outside do it better, so we'll put our money. So if and somebody was talking about this, what if we brought 2 startups and then completely disguised where they're from and their background, and we just tried to have the investor look at the business model rather than, location, et cetera? You'd probably get a different investment decision. But then, like with everything, it's okay. It's just a challenge that we're facing right now, and I think it'll evolve. But you guys have to be the guinea pigs.
Paving the way is important, and not just to create role models and this FOMO feeling, but also because it creates sort of a talent pool. People within your company might end up creating the next startups, and if you end up exiting that money, if that goes back into the community, you sort of create a cycle, which is how ecosystems are born, right? So one of the things that struck me, knowing Europe quite well, we always complain about we don't have a unified market, and in certain places in Europe there is a really significant lack of capital available. Coming here to the region, well, at least they have that. They have the money, and they have a unified market, the Arabic language market. What I learned so far in the very little time that I spend here is that that's not the case at all. In fact, your ecosystems in the region are actually quite siloed in many ways, from what I've learned, and the capital doesn't always flow to startups either, the available capital. So that's a learning for me. But what I really want to talk about is one of the aspects that I mentioned in the beginning. What makes an ecosystem is the talent, meaning you need the right people for you to set out your vision and to sort of build the product and service that you have in mind. You also need entrepreneurs. You need people who want to start their own companies for the right reasons, with the right support. So this is a question to you. What is the availability of talent like here in Bahrain and maybe beyond in the Middle East?
Maybe the entrepreneur should take that.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, Aziz, go ahead.
Sure. Talent is quite possibly the most common complaint I get from founders in our portfolio and during the interviewing process. Again, talent differs. The issues with talent, I mean, that you're going to face differ greatly depending on what position you're trying to fill and what vertical this business is in. First of all, some business models are simply not possible because the talent you need specifically, say in tech or in product, does not exist in this region, period. The other issue is when you find it elsewhere, they don't come to the region, period, because like you said, they can't exactly hop from one startup to the next when they get bored in a 2-year time frame. There's the natural churn that occurs. The churn is to pack up and leave the country, which most people don't want to do and would rather keep, building roots in an ecosystem. So I guess to a degree you do have that chicken and egg problem with the talent problem. One thing that does work, however, is so long as maybe the region, not so much Bahrain, I think the Emirates has it easiest in terms of finding international talent. And international talent is not something that you can lump into one category because they all act in a certain way. To give you an example, I know startups in Saudi. I'm trying to be very careful not to give away that right detail that you can Google. But startups in Saudi have been able to get a great deal of talent from Jordan and from Egypt, particularly in the tech space, and particularly in business models that require a lot of their own software being written ground up, as opposed to getting a guy to manage your third-party integrations, which is sort of the more likely CTO in the region. If you're looking at talent that's not available unless you look at the universities that cluster this sort of talent and produce it and foster the events that tend to attract it, certain hotspots in Europe or the US, that talent will almost never move here unless it's a giant meal ticket. They know they can make X amount. They have their spreadsheet set up. So to a degree, answering this problem is kind of having to build just this model of understanding of the psychology of the person you're trying to attract and what they're trying to accomplish. And there's a significant misalignment there. What needs to happen, because I'll end it with this. One of the main issues with the talent problem is the discussion always starts as what seems like an economic or organizational planning issue, and then it quickly veers off into a political debate of what visas to issue and what amount and how do we get them, et cetera, and who gets what allotment. What needs to happen is the reinvestment in the region to make sure that the talent is being produced here, and stopping long-term mismatches in terms of what markets need and what markets can produce, and then just creating this feedback loop of dependency on outside talent. Whether or not the Dubai model can be replicated with sort of free trade zones and whatnot in the region to quickly adopt the talent that you need. Frankly, that's way outside my pay grade, being able to answer that. But I think in the immediate term, we should focus more on talent retention and less on talent creation, because that's more of a long-term problem to solve.
Idriss, same question. Your view on the availability of talent?
Developing talent? So, I mean, I would echo, I think most of what you're saying. I think that some functions are just impossible to find talents. I mean, so I don't know if we're really poor at this, but we failed quite a few times in actually building and scaling up a tech team in multiple places. So we have about 80 engineers now, close to 100 with the data science, and we've just been unable to find. So when I got we're going through due diligence right now, and I say my tech team is across 3 countries, 4 offices. It's crazy. So because obviously it creates a lot of legacy with regards to work, how are you gonna divide the work? So obviously we have microservices and so on. So we're trying to build that on microservice base, but still there is quite a lot of communication that needs to happen. So I think on the tech side I'm almost giving up in building a scalable tech team in Dubai that can serve my tech needs, right? Why is because it's so expensive to bring somebody here, and then it would just being poached so fast, right? So honestly, at some point I wonder if I'm not a recruiting agency for the big group, right? Because they say, okay, Fetchr, 6 months, okay, triple the salary. So you can retain people at 2x salaries, 250% becomes the breaking point, right? So literally you pay X and then they're being poached at 2.5x. That becomes really difficult to retain, irrespective of what you're doing. And all the groups can actually put that money on the table. So I think that's one of the problems that we have not solved, and I just don't think it's solvable at scale, right? So I think having a couple of people in the team, within the tech team, and being able to retain them is a problem that can be solved 5, 10, but having 100 plus is just impossible.
Areije, I see you nodding, so you're in agreement, but do you have anything else to add to that discussion?
I mean, look, I'm going to be the optimist about the
We need
region.
those.
Yeah. Look, again, I think it's just, it's a matter of time. I think, especially here in Bahrain, we're quite an open economy, so being able to attract talent, there's various things that, people will look for. So obviously career progression, whether there's enough, are there startups they want to work in that are here? And at the same time, is it a nice place to live in? Ultimately, we're all human beings, so it's not just, the whole tech and the building the company, but it's ultimately how we actually feel living in the place and working. It'll take time. I think universities obviously play a part, but I don't think we need to wait for the next generation to graduate, but I think it works in tandem. I think obviously the education and including, the type of skills that are required in technology is something that's important. And I know that not only is Bahrain doing that, but also our peers, but I think it's also identifying, and then obviously we need the guinea pigs that have started this earlier to identify the things that are missing, and for them to have the ability to speak to some of the decision makers to be able to attract those kind of skill sets and help them out. Because ultimately, when you're in early ecosystems, it's about the government working closely with the private sector. I feel like there needs to be that hand in hand, and people forget that's what happened in Silicon Valley and other places, because the government was very supportive of the whole entire ecosystem.
Pretty much started all of it 60, 70 years ago, I would say.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting point that I was just going to mention that, because we haven't touched on anything government or policy related yet. And when I was young and naive, I used to say, oh, the government should just get out of the way and let the entrepreneurs do their thing. And now that I'm a bit older and wiser, I know that that's impossible. And it's probably for good reason as well. But a government can only do so much. And like I've seen policies implemented all over Europe and some other parts of the world as well. I would, sort of the stereotype that I had before coming here was that the government was super supportive, because this event is a sort of a testament of this as well. At the same time, this is anecdotal, but I was talking to an entrepreneur earlier today who was building a digital bank and told me that the regulation actually sort of forces him to have a physical branch just to prove that they're a real bank and that they exist as a real, which is sort of counter to the notion of, we want to innovate, we want to progress. So I'd love to get your perspective. I'm a novice here. I don't know anything about the regulation and the policies in place, but I want to hear from you. Is the government supportive? What more can they do? And what should they stop doing? Badr, I'm going to start with you.
So I'll answer that, but I'll just go back to the talent. I want to be optimistic a bit, as Areije was saying. We keep referring to ourselves as MENA startups. So I think we were quite lucky as Lamsa to look at the region as a flat region when it comes to talent. So one of the hacks that I think we were able to do is look at where the talent exists. So for example, some places are known for technology, the others for creativity, and we actually were able to set up pockets of talents in those places that worked out really well for us. So I would say we're a bit lucky when it comes to talent. Lamsa as a total organization, we're at about 80, 90 people, and we're both focused on content and technology. So we've been able to find those places where we tapped into a lot of great talent. Of course, we have to enhance the talents. We have to get people with more knowledge and depth and experience to raise the bar when it comes to standards. But it's been quite good for us in terms of talent. I think we're also lucky from the other side, which is the cause that we work for probably attracts a lot of people. So we're, as you were saying, it's not just about the economics of joining a startup in MENA. It's also, we have people that worked for Disney for many years and felt like they want to give back to society, do something. They had kids of their own and they wanted to kind of feel that they're doing something that's more education related. So we've been very lucky in terms of talent for those two reasons. Going back to your question about government, I think we can't generalize. We've worked with multiple governments across the region, and I think, again, being positive, we've seen a lot of support from various governments. So I'll just, I live in Abu Dhabi now, and one of the reasons that actually made me live in Abu Dhabi is the support of the government. So we've seen tremendous support in terms of the government of Abu Dhabi. We've worked with the government of Dubai, the government of Saudi. And I think, especially in the last few years, if you have a great idea that solves a big problem in society, I think people are starting to listen. We see more younger ministers taking positions, more open-minded, very highly educated, responsible people taking key positions across governments in the region. And I think if you have a solution to a big problem, they're quite ready and open-minded to listen to it. I'll end with a last example. So last year we came out with this concept of launching a theater show for kids based on our IP and content. And every government that we talked to was very open-minded. The moment that they saw that this is a new innovative product, we kind of signed deals with ministries of culture in the UAE, Ministry of Entertainment in Saudi, and we've been rolling out these programs. We must have run about 18 shows so far. I think if we were in another place, we wouldn't have been able, or another geography, I don't think we would have been able to get that product out to the market and activate it in that speed without the support of such government entities.
Very cool. Very interesting. I would be remiss if I also didn't ask you for your, you sit sort of in the middle, but your opinion on government and policy.
Look, I mean, I think government works hand in hand, and ultimately, the role of government is to enable the private sector and to help it thrive. So I'm in agreement with you, because sometimes some people say, oh, the government needs to step back. Yeah, the government will step back when the private sector is, able to flourish and do it on their own. But when it comes to policy, and then to your comment on that digital bank, I'm not sure who that entrepreneur is or whatever the case is, but I mean, Bahrain has quite a progressive regulatory sandbox when it comes to fintech. We've also released, the cryptocurrency type of regulation, which I know some of the even more progressive economies haven't even and are still sort of worried about doing. So it's very easy to just pick on what we don't have, but let's try to see, and again, being the optimist, what we actually have come about. So if I go back 9 years ago, and I'm sure Idriss and Badr will agree with me when they first started, there was actually very little support in the whole region. But ultimately, look at them, they're still here. If an entrepreneur has the drive and the determination and the resilience, they will thrive in any economy. That's what they are, that's what they were made up, and that's what they're made to do. But if we're gonna just wait for the things to happen so that it makes it easier for me, then there's no point, that's not really like an entrepreneur, that's somebody just trying to build a business, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think sometimes you need to have to fight and struggle to create that opportunity. We have 2 companies that graduated from the regulatory sandbox, and I'm sure they had their ups and downs, but what's great about Bahrain is that you have the ability, we're small, we're agile. Being able to access the decision maker is literally a phone call or an email away. And there's not like so many people that you have to get through. So sometimes you take advantage, and to the point of what Aziz and I think Badr were saying, is that it's where you feel your startup will require support and what works for you, and you'll move there. So it's not about what's better and what's worse, but what's good for you as an entrepreneur. And I strongly believe the ones that continue to thrive and support will find their way and will bring the government with them as well.
As you say, like nobody ever said it was going to be easy, right?
Yeah.
So Aziz, maybe a question going back to talent, because we all talked about talent in the sense of recruiting and hiring and retaining, but I'm also curious to know if there's a drive, if there's a mindset in the people here to want to become entrepreneurs, and if you and the people that you meet in your role, do you meet the ambitious entrepreneurs that any ecosystem needs to sort of take the ecosystem to the next level?
Again, this is one of those questions where the answer gets kind of siloed by geography. In speaking for Kuwait, at least home base, Kuwait has a long and illustrious history of entrepreneurship. The merchant families became the merchant families because of a long line of entrepreneurs. Men and women have been able to make a name, a sustainable name, and make a lasting imprint in the market. So I think in Kuwait, there's less of that issue. We do see a lot of ambitious Kuwaitis. I'm talking about the venture world and non-venture. A lot of ambitious Kuwaitis are taking the steps to build lasting businesses, things that actually can endure beyond 5 years and generate significant cash flows and employ significant people and play a real role in the local economy. As for, and that's not to say that we don't have like a parallel labor market of the expats who fill in some of the positions and don't really foresee long-term roles in the area. In terms of in terms of like GCC talent working elsewhere, for the reasons I think everyone on this panel has enumerated in one way or another, they tend to cluster around certain geographies and operate out of there, and then use that as home base to reach out to where they came from, and plus neighboring areas, and make that their geographic approach. I think all in all, talent willing to be entrepreneurial is present. Opportunity depends enormously by sector. Depends enormously by the resources at the very base level where people would need to raise to get started with only an idea, which becomes restricted to friends and family. Talent, I think, won't be able, there's only a critical mass that you'll be able to hit as an individual talented person with any particular startup working in any particular field. And then you hit that point where you have to kind of look in the mirror and admit to yourself, maybe I am mortal, and maybe I do need help. I think that's where people will begin to vote with their feet and will walk to wherever they believe talent happens to be.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on this, or do I move to the next topic?
I think with working with millions of kids across the region, one of the main subjects that we try to encourage kids and teach them is various new fields of interest. So we build content for kids to look at what's out there. So typically we've all been in the region taught to either be a really good engineer or a doctor or a lawyer. I think we've placed a lot of emphasis in Lamsa to teach kids to look at other professions, including becoming entrepreneurs and having the initiative. And I think it's had a lot of impact. So we see a lot of consumption on that kind of content that we create that kind of talks about what professions or what areas of interest could be, including things like promoting a kid to be a chef, for example, right? And we've seen a lot of young boys that have aspirations to get in the kitchen and create things, which traditionally in this area has been kind of limited to different specific genders. So we try to break boundaries, and we try to be part of the solution rather than just sitting and saying, hey, we depend on the government for doing that. We could, as Areije was saying, by working together, private and government, we could achieve things, I think.
I mean, purely on the entrepreneur side, I think this region is amazing, right, in that sense, right? There's this bursting energy of and it's driven by both, like tech adoption, the fact that everybody has a smartphone, so they manage to be connected to the online world, to the fact that it's well educated, quite a good purchasing power, most of the time speak 2-3 languages, right? So you got all these defining factors, and then there is quite a lot of people that are actually interested now in becoming entrepreneurs. So I mean, as much as the ecosystem has other issues, I don't think that the issue of having enough people that want to try and become entrepreneur is one of them. The culture is changing, definitely, with regards to the Gulf itself. But if you look at the broader region, you have definitely quite a lot of entrepreneurs. And I'm mentoring a few companies. I'm surprised by how good they are, right? One of the key things, when you look at Europe or the US, one of the gap that you find is that motivation, that relentlessness, right? That ability to actually drive the business day in, day out. You don't have that problem here.
Well, then my next question, if I would be an aspirational founder or a wantrepreneur, as they say, in this region, what vertical should I be focusing on? Is there anything that's severely lacking here that has so much opportunity that should be attacked? Is it fintech? Is it e-commerce marketplaces?
Everything.
Or are we moving to sort of the new AI, blockchain, VR technologies that sort of are hot at the moment? Or does anyone have a view on which verticals are really ripe for the picking in the region?
I mean, I think all sector,
Yeah.
honestly, right? You have all the right fundamentals in this part of the world, right? That's why, I mean, I always love like how it's you have all these elements that are coming together at the same time. You have a young population, you got smartphone penetration that is one of the highest in the world, you have the app usage that is one of the highest in the world, you have good purchasing power, you have model that can be disrupted now. And you have, at least if it's not the same, if it's a very fragmented market, and what we call the Middle East obviously is actually a constellation of very fragmented markets, but you have a common language, so you have a couple of things that are good ingredients to build like a regional product. So look, I think all the ingredients are here. If you look at, even on I would say the first generations of e-commerce, not even e-commerce, of like technology and e-commerce represents less than 1% of retail, while all the ingredients are here to be like 10 to 12%. So even like boring e-commerce companies can grow like very quickly because tons of the segments are not even catered to. So you don't need to be deep tech to actually build a successful business, right? So you can actually just build a very solid business if you have the right fundamentals.
And I think also just being able to identify opportunity, because definitely if I knew the answer to that, I'd be off trying to build that that business. But I mean, I'm sure that, I don't know, Badr and Idriss can say this better, but like I don't know if Badr just graduated out of university and I said, okay, these are the missing things. But I think it probably, like you said, it happened by mistake, right? That you identified the opportunity. And I think mostly that's what entrepreneurs do. They find out, oh well, does anyone do this? And then that's the opportunity. So if you are struggling and facing a problem, and you are able to try to create a solution that ultimately fixes that, then that's the industry you should be in.
Aziz, do you subscribe to this as well as from the VC side?
I got a lot of pitches that I know are just going to be fluff on the side of the desk within a half second of looking at the front page. And I think any VC who operates for longer than maybe a month will begin to develop that radar, that sniff test. For me, I think every entrepreneur, and I've honestly considered writing this on the inside of the elevator so that maybe they'd read it. Just every entrepreneur has to answer the question, why are you doing this? How big is the market? And why you of all people? I see a lot of entrepreneurs who really quickly throw together a deck. And sure, it looks interesting at first glance. The graphics are okay, I suppose. You'd want to look at them again. But there's no substance, and there's no reason for me to believe that this is going to be, surviving, let alone thriving 5 years from now. We have, if you were to look at the hierarchy of the startups that we have in the region, and this is just me being brutally honest, at the top tier you have a lot of exits north of $100 million. Kuwait has produced a significant number of those, Talabat and Carriage, and we're looking at a few that are well beyond that in valuation nowadays. In most ecosystems, you would have a tier 2 of people who have valuations between say, 10 and 50, who you could reasonably foresee going north of 100, within a few years' time. And then tier 3 is where you have a lot of that weird stuff that sloshes around that I don't know where it came from exactly, but won't go away. And for some reason, we don't have a perfectly built-out pyramid. We have, an inflating somewhat top, which is, what we look at as the heralded sign of success. Phase 2 is kind of looking a little skinny. It's gotten better since I've really started here a few years ago, and it continues to improve. And then you have the phase 3s at the bottom, and some of them just still won't go away.
It's funny that you mentioned that, by the way, because as a journalist, when I get pitched by startups, that's the question I usually ask: why are you doing this? What's driving you to do this, and why you? Like, what makes you special, right? Just on the side note. We're quickly running out of time. But I'd like to conclude with something, we're going to go one by one, but if you had all the power, all the time, all the resources to change anything about the ecosystems here in the region, what would it be that you would fix and why?
That's a hard question.
Left to right.
I think I'd stop the whining. I think ultimately, we spend way too much time trying to identify the things that are wrong instead of trying to convert that and actually doing something about it.
You should come to Europe.
No,
we
but
do a lot of
honestly,
whining over there.
it's kind of the story of how I fell into what I did. I used to sit down and say, "Oh, we don't have this in Bahrain. Oh, we don't do this in Bahrain." And then my father said to me, he said, "Areije, you know what? You've been able to have the blessing of education. You've traveled around the world. What are you doing to change?" And so, you know what? It wasn't easy. You know, I came from the private sector, different type of environment, different type of culture, and I moved into the public sector. And it's not the same, you know, it's different. And, you know, my team is sitting here in the audience. We've gone through a lot, but instead of whining, we should, that's what I changed.
Oh, yeah.
Stop the whining.
Less whining. I like your dad as well. That's very, very good advice.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that would be the message, right? I think obviously we have issues in the ecosystem. Obviously, like, it's a very fragmented market, difficult to retain talents and all of this. But at the end of the day, it's also, you know, like what makes an entrepreneur great, I think, is that he sees difficulties as opportunities, right? And you know, like honestly, like when we face so many issues, that once you solve them one by one, it's as many barriers to entry that you create. Right, so stop thinking about, you know, like all the things could be different, and you know, so that's one. And then two, I think it's not easy anywhere. I mean, if you look at, you know, like, I don't know if you read like Shoe Dog and the last, just read. I mean, if
literally the last book I read.
If the audience has not read it, like, and if you don't have time to read the full book, like just read the last paragraph, like the last chapter, sorry, and you're just like, was it all worth it, right? And his answer is basically no. All right, so it's like. Let's not think that it is also like we have our own difficulties, but we don't have the difficulty of hyper competition that you have in the US, for example. That is a huge problem. Nobody talks here about hyper competition, but you know, like so some other markets have different kind of issues. So I think it's all about having the mindset that you can. I love the fact that even if it's tough, the entrepreneur will make it happen. Okay, like I remember, like from like just one small example. Like the whole Dubai free zone, the number of employees you can have on your visa depends on how big is your office. Okay, makes sense. Okay, the problem, I'm a logistics company. Yeah. So I've got drivers, I need visas, I'm not gonna increase the size of my office, makes no sense. The ability to actually have access to like the CEO of the free zone, and it changed the rule for us. In what country can you do that, right? So you have tons of difficulties, but honestly, you can build strong businesses.
Yeah.
Badr, if you could change anything, what would you change?
I wouldn't look at it that way. I'd say we just have to start believing in each other more. Just picking up on what they said, I'm super optimistic about the region, about us as entrepreneurs, about the ecosystem. I think if we just believe in each other more, because at the end of the day, businesses are built around humans, investors are humans, entrepreneurs are humans, you know, the customers are humans. If we just nurture that power of belief in each other, I think it'll just work out really beautifully. When we started and we were talking about building the biggest brand for kids in the region, very few people believed, right? And the ones that did today are very happy investors, right? And ecosystem players. So I think if we just believe in each other more, and I think that's coming with time, we're seeing a lot of improvement. I think the whole idea of they're different than us, you know, people in the West can do it better. I think we need to change that mentality. When we started Lamsa, we were actually one of the first, if not the first, subscription service for kids that's doing edutainment globally, because we launched before the app stores had subscription. So we did it manually through telcos. And so we do have the ability in the region to invent business models, to invent products and services that compete globally and regionally. So I would just focus on the power of believing in each other and growing that ecosystem together.
I like that.
And just as a small example, recently we got contacted by
Very quickly.
the German government. They sent members of the parliament that's responsible for digitization to the United Arab Emirates to learn how can the governments move faster. So just we should all be proud that, you know, the West is actually looking at this region as examples of how you can move faster in certain
Great.
fields.
Aziz, I also want to give you the opportunity.
Sure. Very briefly, just to counter Areije, I love whining. I mean, frankly, it's a
I
very
know.
cathartic.
That message was to you. No, I'm just kidding.
Secondly, to answer your question, I think, I mean, startups really at the end of the day are a bunch of people and a bunch of buildings and a bunch of paperwork, right? Everything
We
else
just
is
said
kind of...
they're humans, man.
No, right, I mean, everything else is really in your head, right? I mean, the whole glitz and glamour, it's what we ascribe to it. As for the people component, I mean, we really need to stop, I think, I'm whining again, we really need to stop looking elsewhere to solve that problem. Just if I had one magic wand to kind of like make everyone change, it would be to tell the local population it's okay to take more risk. You have nothing to lose. You're not going to wind up on the street hungry. It's okay to do things that don't have a perfect 5-year plan to them. Just take a risk. If it works, great. If it doesn't, you learned. And then take another risk.
Perfect. And we just ran out of timer, but I'm going to leave you one thought of my own, which is something that I've observed over the years as well. People underestimate the power of community. When entrepreneurs come together and share their experience and learn from one another and, network, events like this, but also virtually and help each other, it makes so much difference. And all the capital in the world and the addressable market, it's relevant. Of course it is. But please also look out for each other. As Idriss correctly mentioned, doing a startup is hard. It's a struggle. It's supposed to be in a way, because nobody said it was going to be easy. So please look out for each other and help each other. And that's my note to you. Thank you so much for the discussion.
Thank you.